The crystal walls of the Galactic Council station shook like they were made of paper. Red emergency lights flashed everywhere as sirens screamed through the corridors. Species from across the galaxy rushed through the halls, their faces showing pure terror. Ambassador Veltar pressed his six-fingered hands against the control panel, his blue skin turning pale as ice. The massive holographic display in front of him showed readings that made no sense. Energy levels that shouldn't exist. Power signatures that broke every law of physics he knew. "This can't be real," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Nothing generates this much energy. Nothing." Council leader Mordak burst through the chamber doors, his 8 tentacles thrashing wildly. Behind him came representatives from dozens of species, the scaled reptoids, the crystalline Vorthon, the gaseous, beings of the Nebula Collective. All of them looked scared out of their minds. "Report!" Mordak's voice boomed across the chamber. "What's causing these readings?" "Sir," Veltar's hands shook as he pointed at the display. "Long-range sensors detected it 3 hours ago. A massive energy signature approaching from the Sol system. It's bigger than anything we've ever recorded." The chamber fell silent. Everyone knew about the Sol system. That's where the humans used to live before they disappeared, before they went quiet after the Great Raids 3 centuries ago. "Humans?" laughed General Kexra, his mandibles clicking with amusement. "Those weaklings were crushed long ago. Their colonies burned. Their people taken as slaves. They couldn't have built anything like this. But deep in the darkness of space, far from the Council's arguing, something extraordinary moved through the void. The UES Vengeance cut through space, like a knife through silk, its massive hull reflecting starlight like black metal. 40 kilometers of pure human engineering, built with 3 centuries of focused rage. Captain Dae-Ho Kim stood alone on the observation deck, his reflection ghosted in the reinforced windows. At 55, his face carried lines that spoke of hard decisions and sleepless nights. His dark eyes held memories that would break lesser men. The distant glow of the galactic core grew brighter with each passing hour. Soon he would see the worlds that had laughed while his people screamed, the civilizations that had built their empires on human suffering. "Captain," came a voice from behind him. Lieutenant Hyojin Park stepped onto the deck, her boots clicking against the metal floor. At 32, she was young for her rank, but her eyes held the same fire that burned in every human aboard the ship. "We're picking up interesting chatter on the long-range communications." Dae-Ho turned slightly. "Let me hear it." The speakers crackled to life, filling the deck with panicked voices from across the galaxy. Ships reporting impossible sensor readings. Defense fleets scrambling to mobilize. Entire star systems going into lockdown. 17 different systems have gone to high alert, Hyojin reported, a small smile playing at her lips. "They're scared, Captain. Really scared." Dae-Ho's weathered face showed the first hint of satisfaction it had worn in years. "Good. Fear is the beginning of understanding. For 300 years, they forgot what they did to us. Time to refresh their memory." The Vengeance continued its silent approach, and its very presence seemed to bend space around it. The ship's hull was forged from materials that existed only in the cores of dying stars, elements that humanity had learned to harvest and shape during their long isolation. Every plate, every beam, every rivet had been crafted with one purpose: to ensure that what happened to humanity would never happen again. In the ship's massive engine room, Chief Engineer Jae-Wook Nam monitored systems that defied galactic understanding. Quantum reactors that drew power from the fabric of space itself. Defensive systems that could turn enemy fire into harmless light. Weapons that could crack planets or gently relocate entire fleets without harming a single life. All systems operating at peak efficiency, he reported to the bridge. The galaxy's about to learn what 3 centuries of human innovation can accomplish. Back on the Council station, the panic was reaching new heights. Emergency meetings were called every hour as more reports flooded in. The approaching vessel wasn't just large, it was impossible. Its energy output exceeded that of entire star systems. "Sir." Communications Officer Nalvek's voice shook as he addressed the Council. His insectoid features twitched with nervousness. "We're receiving a transmission from the approaching vessel." The massive chamber fell completely silent. Hundreds of beings from across the galaxy held their breath as the main display flickered to life. Captain Dae-ho Kim's face appeared on the screen, his expression calm, but his eyes holding the weight of centuries. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of a species that had been tested by fire and emerged stronger. "This is Captain Dae-ho Kim of the United Earth ship Vengeance," he said, each word dropping like a stone into still water. 300 years ago, you thought you destroyed us. You were wrong. We are coming to collect what is owed. This is Earth's final warning." The transmission cut out, leaving the galaxy's most powerful beings staring at empty space. In that moment, they finally understood a terrible truth. Their victims had never forgotten, never forgiven, and never stopped preparing for this day of reckoning. Space itself seemed to scream as the Vengeance tore through the fabric of hyperspace and dropped into normal reality at the edge of Nexari territory. The massive ship's arrival wasn't just dramatic. It was physically impossible by every law of physics the galaxy understood. The moment the 40-kilometer vessel materialized, 3 nearby moons suddenly lurched out of their ancient orbits. The gravitational field surrounding the human ship was so intense that it bent space-time like a massive invisible hand, reshaping reality itself. Admiral Lixtar stood frozen on the bridge of his flagship, the Nexari dreadnought Bone Crusher, watching his instruments go completely insane. Red warning lights flashed everywhere as his crew scrambled to make sense of readings that shouldn't exist. "Sir, the gravitational sensors are overloading," his science officer's voice cracked with panic. "That ship is generating a gravity well equivalent to a small planet. How is that even possible?" Lixtar's 4 eyes widened as he stared at the massive human vessel on his main screen. Its hull was unlike anything in the galaxy, black as the E, void between stars, but with strange patterns that seemed to shift and move in the light. It looked less like a ship and more like a living creature made of metal and energy. "Get me Fleet Command," he barked at his communications officer. "Alert all defense stations. We have a situation." But even as he spoke, the Vengeance was doing something that made the Admiral's blood run cold. The ship's hull began to open up like some massive mechanical flower, revealing enormous construction bays inside its body. Robotic arms longer than city blocks reached out into space, grabbing nearby asteroids and pulling them into the ship's interior. "What are they doing?" whispered his tactical officer. They got their answer within minutes. The asteroids were being processed at impossible speed, broken down, refined, and transformed into something new. Then, to the horror of everyone watching, smaller ships began emerging from the Vengeance's construction bays. But these weren't ordinary vessels. Each one was a perfect example of human engineering, sleek and deadly, their hulls glowing with energy fields that made them look like liquid silver. They moved through space with a grace that made the galaxy's finest fighters look clumsy and primitive. Captain Dae-ho Kim stood calmly on the Vengeance's command deck, watching the Nexari fleet scramble into defensive positions. After 3 centuries of preparation, this moment felt almost anticlimactic. Beside him, Tactical Officer Boram Han ran final checks on weapon systems that had never been tested in actual combat. 1,200 Nexari vessels moving to intercept us, Captain, she reported, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what they were facing. Their fleet includes 47 dreadnoughts and over 300 heavy cruisers. Should we engage? Dae-ho's weathered face remained calm. No, Lieutenant. They're not worth our ammunition. Besides, we didn't come here to commit genocide. Begin the demonstration. Boram's fingers danced across her control panel and across the fleet of newly constructed human vessels, weapon systems that existed only in theory until moments ago, came online. Admiral Lixtar watched in growing horror as his massive fleet opened fire on the approaching human ships. Plasma cannons that could melt through solid titanium, particle beams that could slice through asteroids, missile salvos that could level cities. All of it struck the human vessels and simply disappeared. "Impossible," he screamed, his voice echoing across the bridge. "Nothing can generate shields that powerful. Our weapons should be cutting through them like paper." His science officer stared at his readings in complete disbelief. "Sir, their shields aren't absorbing our weapons. They're converting the energy into something else. It's like our attacks are feeding their power systems. The human ships moved through the Nexari fleet like ghosts passing through walls. They didn't fire a single shot, didn't launch a single missile. Instead, they did something far more terrifying. They began phasing through the enemy vessels themselves. Lieutenant Commander Tae-hyun Kang piloted his newly constructed fighter directly into the hull of a Nexari dreadnought. Instead of crashing, his ship passed through the alien metal like it was made of water. Once inside, his vessel released a pulse of energy that shut down every system on the enemy ship without harming a single crew member. Across the battlefield, the same scene played out again and again. Human ships moved through the Nexari fleet, like surgical instruments, disabling each vessel from within while leaving their crews completely unharmed. "Enemy fleet neutralized, Captain," Tae-hyun reported back to the Vengeance, his voice carrying a note of amazement. "All vessels disabled, no casualties on either side. Their crews are alive and uninjured, but their ships are completely powerless." Dae-ho nodded with satisfaction. "Excellent work, Commander. Now they'll understand. We're not here for mindless slaughter. We're here for justice." The Vengeance continued its stately approach toward the Nexari homeworld, leaving behind a fleet of 1,200 disabled warships, drifting helplessly in space. The message was crystal clear. Humanity had evolved far beyond the need for wholesale destruction. They had become something the galaxy had never seen before, a species with the power to destroy anything they chose, but the wisdom to use that power with precision. On the surface of Kethmore, Overlord Kexmoth stood in his crystal palace watching through massive viewing screens as his invincible fleet was systematically disabled by a handful of human vessels. His 4 arms trembled as he realized that everything he thought he knew about humans was wrong. "My lord," his tactical advisor's voice shook with fear, "our entire defense fleet has been neutralized in under 30 minutes. Their ships are intact, their crews are alive, but none of their systems are responding." Kexmoth's massive form slumped in his throne as he watched the human ship enter orbit around his world. The Vengeance cast a shadow across entire continents as it positioned itself above the planet's capital city. "What are they?" he whispered, finally understanding that the weak, defenseless humans his people had once hunted were gone forever, replaced by something far more dangerous than any conqueror the galaxy had ever known. The answer came as the Vengeance's hull began to glow with energy, and Captain Dae-ho Kim's voice echoed across every communication device on the planet, carrying with it the weight of 3 centuries of human determination and the promise of justice finally served. The Vengeance hung above the Nexari homeworld like a giant predator circling its prey. The massive ship's gravitational field was so powerful that the planet's oceans began behaving strangely. Massive tidal waves rolled across continents as the water tried to reach toward the human vessel hanging in space above them. On the planet's surface, panic spread through every city. The Nexari had ruled this part of the galaxy for over 1,000 years, crushing anyone who dared oppose them. But now, looking up at the impossible human ship blotting out their sun, they felt true fear for the first time in their lives. Captain Dae-ho Kim walked slowly to the communication station on his bridge, his boots echoing in the sudden silence. Around him his crew watched with quiet intensity. They had trained for this moment for decades, but now that it was here, the weight of it felt almost overwhelming. "Open a channel to the planet," Dae-ho ordered, his voice steady as granite. "All frequencies. I want every Nexari on that world to hear what I have to say." Lieutenant Hyojin Park's fingers flew across her controls. "Channel open, Captain. You're broadcasting to the entire planet." Dae-ho stepped forward, looking directly into the camera that would carry his image to billions of Nexari below. When he spoke, his voice carried 3 centuries of human pain and determination. "Overlord Kexmoth." The words echoed across every screen, every radio, every communication device on the planet below. "I am Captain Dae-ho Kim of Earth. You have something that belongs to us." In his palace of living crystal that stretched high above the capital city, Overlord Kexmoth's 4 massive arms slammed against his throne. His multiple eyes blazed with rage as he stared at the human face on his screens. How dare this inferior, Species address him as an equal. We owe humans nothing. His voice boomed across the palace halls, causing his servants to scatter in terror. Your pathetic species was crushed centuries ago. We made you into what you were meant to be, slaves. But Deho's expression didn't change. If anything, his eyes grew colder. Our people, he continued, each word dropping like a stone into still water. 2.3 million souls taken as slaves, entire colonies burned for sport, children stolen from their families. We want them back. Kexmoth's laughter echoed through his palace, but there was a note of hysteria in it now. Impossible. They've been dead for centuries, worked to death in our mines, our factories, our pleasure gardens. Then we'll settle for justice. What happened? Next wasn't war in any traditional sense. It was something far more precise and terrifying. The vengeance began to move with surgical precision around the planet, its hull opening to reveal mechanical arms that stretched for kilometers. These weren't weapons. They were tools of impossible sophistication. Weapons Officer In-Ho Bay watched his instruments with amazement as the ship's quantum manipulators went to work. Sir, we're beginning the orbital sweep. Every defense platform, every weapons satellite, every military installation in orbit is being relocated. That was the strangest part. The vengeance didn't destroy the Nexari orbital defenses. Instead, it simply moved them. Massive space stations that had taken decades to build were gently lifted from their positions and transported to empty regions of space. Their crews teleported safely to the planet's surface before their stations were relocated. No casualties, Captain, reported Medical Officer Dr. Sujin Yoon. Every Nexari we've displaced has been transported safely to designated areas on the planet. They're scared and confused, but completely unharmed. Overlord Kexmoth watched in growing horror from his palace as his empire's might was dismantled, piece by piece. His orbital shipyards gone, his defense platforms moved to empty space, his weapon satellites relocated to the system's outer rim, all of it done without a single shot fired, without a single life lost. What are they doing? He whispered to his advisors, but none of them had answers. Chief Engineer Jae-wook Nam provided the answer from the Vengeance's construction bays. Memorial construction at 60%, Captain. The quantum forges are working perfectly. Above, the Nexari homeworld, something beautiful and terrible was taking shape. The Vengeance was building a monument, a crystalline structure larger than most space stations, its faceted surfaces catching and reflecting the light from the system's star. But this wasn't just any monument. As the structure grew, holographic displays began appearing within its crystal walls. Faces, thousands upon thousands of human faces. Men, women, children. Scientists, artists, farmers, dreamers. All of them taken during the Great Raids 3 centuries ago. Stop this, Kexmoth's desperate voice broadcast across all frequencies. We can negotiate. We can pay reparations. We can give you territory, resources, anything you want. Captain Deho's response was quiet but final. You had 3 centuries to show remorse, 300 years to acknowledge what you did. You chose pride instead. The memorial continued to grow, and as it did, something magical happened. The crystal structure began refracting the light from the system's star, breaking it into countless colors that painted the entire planet below in shifting rainbows. Every Nexari on the world could see it, a constant reminder of what they had taken. Inside the memorial's heart, the holographic displays showed more than just faces. They showed lives, human children learning to walk, scientists making discoveries, artists creating beauty, families gathering for meals, all the small precious moments that had been stolen when the Nexari turned humans into property. Memorial construction complete, Captain, reported Lieutenant Hee-Jin Park 6 hours after they had begun. The quantum crystalline structure is stable and self-maintaining. According to our calculations, it will remain operational for approximately 10,000 years. Deho nodded slowly, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders that he had carried for his entire adult life. Then our people will never be forgotten again. Every Nexari who looks up at their sky will remember what they took from us. Below on the planet, Overlord Kexmoth stood at his palace windows, staring up at the magnificent, terrible monument hanging in his sky. The rainbow light streaming down from it painted his crystal walls in colors that shifted and danced like living things. For the first time in his long life, he understood what humanity had become during their 3 centuries of silence. They hadn't been hiding in fear. They had been learning, growing, evolving into something the galaxy had never seen before, a species with the power to destroy worlds, but the wisdom to choose justice over revenge. The memorial would remain above his world until the end of time, ensuring that the Nexari would never again forget the price of treating any species as disposable. And across the galaxy, other worlds that had profited from human suffering were beginning to realize that their day of reckoning was coming too. The age of impunity was over. Humanity had returned to the stars, and they would never again allow themselves or anyone else to be treated as less than equals in the cosmic community. The vengeance slipped away from Nexari space like a shadow moving across the stars, leaving behind the glowing memorial that would remind an entire world of their crimes for the next 10,000 years. But Captain Dae-Ho Kim had no intention of stopping there. His ship's quantum computers held detailed records of every species, every world, every organization that had profited from human suffering 3 centuries ago. The galaxy was about to learn what true justice looked like. Their next stop was the Vorthan Collective, a group of crystalline beings who had served as middlemen in the slave trade. The vengeance appeared above their trading hub without warning, its massive form casting shadows across their crystal cities. "Sir," reported Science Officer Yujin Seo from her station, "we're detecting 17 active slave markets on the planet below. Approximately 40,000 beings from 12 different species are being held in bondage." Daeho's jaw tightened. The Vorthan had turned suffering into a business model, buying and selling sentient beings like they were pieces of equipment. "Begin liberation protocol. I want every slave freed and every slaver relocated to the nearest uninhabited world with basic survival supplies." What followed was unlike anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. The Vengeance's hull opened to reveal thousands of smaller craft, each one piloted by an advanced AI that could make decisions faster than any living being. These ships descended to the planet's surface like a swarm of silver angels, their advanced scanners instantly identifying every slave and every slaver. The process was eerily efficient. Slavers found themselves suddenly teleported to barren moons, with nothing but basic food synthesizers and shelter generators. Their former victims were gently lifted from their chains and transported to medical facilities that the human ships constructed in real time from raw materials. "Liberation complete," reported Lieutenant Commander Tae-hyun Kang, who was coordinating the operation from his command ship. 43,000 beings freed, including species we've never encountered before. Whole slavers relocated to supervised worlds where they'll have to work for their own survival. The pattern repeated across dozens of worlds. The Kalish weapon dealers who had supplied the Nexari with their raiding equipment woke up to find their factories converted overnight into hospitals and schools. The Morphic pirates who had hunted human refugees found their bases transformed into refugee centers for species they had once terrorized. At the Galactic Council Station, panic had given way to something approaching hysteria. Emergency sessions were called every few hours as reports flooded in from across known space. The humans weren't conquering territory or seizing resources. They were systematically fixing every injustice they encountered. "This is unprecedented," muttered Council Leader Mordak, his tentacles writhing with nervous energy. "In 3 weeks, they freed over 2 million slaves, shut down 47 pirate organizations, and converted a dozen weapon manufacturing worlds into humanitarian centers." Ambassador Veltar of the Hydrax Coalition stood to address the assembled representatives. His normally blue skin had taken on a pale, almost white tinge. "Fellow beings, we must face facts. The humans aren't interested in conquest or revenge. They're reforming our entire civilization." "Sir," interrupted Communications Officer Nalvek, his insectoid features twitching with nervousness, "we're receiving surrender requests from 47 different systems. They're asking what they need to do to avoid human intervention." The council chamber fell silent. Never in galactic history had so many worlds voluntarily surrendered to a single species. But the humans had demonstrated something that terrified every government in the galaxy: the ability to completely reshape civilization without firing a shot in anger. Captain Deho's response to the surrender requests was broadcast across the galaxy, his face appearing on every screen in known space. "Your demands are simple," he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had seen too much suffering. "Never again. Never again will any being be treated as property. Never again will the strong prey on the weak simply because they can." The transformation that followed was nothing short of revolutionary. Within weeks, the Galactic Accords had been completely rewritten. Slavery was abolished throughout known space. Unprovoked aggression became punishable by immediate intervention from Earth's rapidly expanding fleet. Most importantly, every species was guaranteed protection under the new galactic law. The Vengeance took position at the galaxy's center, its sensors monitoring every system for signs of the old ways returning. But the ship wasn't alone anymore. Human construction facilities had been working around the clock, producing not warships but vessels of exploration and protection. Sleek ships that could travel faster than anything the galaxy had ever seen, their hulls gleaming with the same advanced materials that made the Vengeance nearly indestructible. Lieutenant Commander Taihyun approached his captain as they watched the memorial services being broadcast from hundreds of worlds. Species after species was holding ceremonies to honor the human colonists they had forgotten, their leaders publicly apologizing for centuries-old crimes. "Sir," Taehyun said quietly, "was it worth it? The 3 centuries of isolation, the preparation, the transformation of our entire civilization into something focused solely on preventing this from happening again." Captain Daeho Kim stood at the observation deck, looking out at the stars where new human settlements were already beginning to flourish. These weren't the vulnerable colonies of 3 centuries ago. They were heavily protected worlds where humans and aliens worked together as equals. "Ask me in another 3 centuries, Commander," Daeho replied, watching as a group of young aliens played with human children on a nearby space station. "When children of every species can dream of the stars without fear, when the strong protect the weak instead of preying on them, when the galaxy remembers that every life has value." The Vengeance continued its eternal patrol, a silent guardian moving through the darkness between stars. Its sensors watched for any sign of the old cruelties returning, its weapons ready to intervene if necessary. But increasingly, intervention wasn't needed. The galaxy had learned its lesson. In the depths of space where the first human colonies had once flourished before being burned to ash, new settlements began to bloom. This time they were protected not just by human technology, but by a galactic civilization that finally understood the true price of cruelty. The Great Silence was over. Humanity had returned to the stars, bringing with them not conquest or revenge, but the promise that no species would ever again face the horror of systematic extinction. The galaxy was safer now, watched over by beings who had learned that the greatest strength came not from the ability to destroy, but from the wisdom to protect. And in the memorial above the Nexari homeworld, holographic images of the lost continued to play, ensuring that the galaxy would never forget the price of treating any being as less than equal. The end.